When my daughter Rachel looked me in the eye on Father's Day and told me I was not welcome in the home I paid for, she thought she was just kicking out an embarrassing old man. She thought she was protecting her social status from a father who wears flannel shirts and drives a 20-year-old Ford truck. She had no idea that the moment she slammed that heavy oak door in my face, she wasn't just shutting me out. She was shutting off the money. She was shutting off the mortgage payments. She was shutting off her entire lifestyle. I stood on the porch for exactly 10 seconds after the lock clicked. I didn't scream. I didn't pound on the door. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. I saw the pending transfer for $6,800 scheduled for midnight. With one tap of my thumb, I canceled it. Then I called my lawyer. Before I tell you how I brought their house of cards crashing down in a single evening, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. My name is George Caldwell. I am 73 years old, and this is the story of how I taught my ungrateful daughter that you never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the only thing keeping you from living on the street. The engine of my 2005 Ford F-150 rattled and coughed as I turned onto Oak Street. It was a sound I usually loved, the sound of reliability, the sound of hard work. But today, surrounded by the silent, gleaming bodies of Mercedes SUVs and BMW sedans lining the curb, my truck sounded like a dying animal. I parked 3 houses away from number 24. I didn't want to embarrass Rachel. I knew how much she cared about appearances. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had combed my gray hair back neatly. I was wearing my best Sunday shirt, a blue button-down I bought at Walmart 3 years ago. It was clean. It was pressed. To me, it looked respectable. To the people living in this neighborhood, I suppose, it looked like a rag. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the small velvet-wrapped box. Inside was a vintage Hamilton watch. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have diamonds. But it was the watch I wore when I signed the deal that sold my logistics company for $60 million 5 years ago. I wanted to give it to Brian, my son-in-law. I thought maybe if he wore it, he might absorb some of the work ethic it represented. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the truck, and walked toward the house. The house at 24 Oak Street was magnificent. It should be. I bought it. Technically, the deed was in a trust, but the down payment, the renovations, the landscaping, and every single monthly mortgage payment came directly from my accounts. Rachel and Brian told their friends they were successful real estate investors. They told their neighbors they bought this place with a bonus check. I never corrected them. I just wanted them to be happy. I walked up the long paved driveway. The grass was manicured to perfection, a vibrant green that looked almost artificial. I could hear music coming from inside, the soft hum of jazz and the clinking of crystal glasses. It was Father's Day. I had been invited for a 5 o'clock dinner. It was 4:55. I was on time. I rang the doorbell. I waited. I could hear laughter on the other side. I rang again. Finally, the heavy wood door cracked open. It wasn't fully opened, just a crack enough for a slice of a face to appear. It was Rachel. She didn't smile. She didn't open the door wider to let me in. She slipped through the crack and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind her. She was wearing a silk dress that shimmered in the afternoon sun, the kind of dress that costs more than my truck. Her hair was done up in an elaborate twist. She looked beautiful. She also looked terrified. "Dad," she hissed, her voice a sharp whisper. "What are you doing here?" I blinked, confused. I held up the small velvet box. "It's Father's Day, Rachel. You invited me. Dinner at 5. Remember?" Rachel looked over her shoulder at the closed door, then back at me. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my worn work boots and the slightly frayed collar of my Walmart shirt. Her lip curled. That was before Brian invited the partner's dad. important people, investors. The bank director is in there. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, so I asked, "I'm your father. I'm Brian's father-in-law. I'm family." Rachel let out a short, cruel laugh. "Look at you, Dad. Look at what you are wearing. You look like you just came from fixing a toilet. You smell like old gasoline. These are high net worth individuals. We are trying to close a deal. We are trying to build a future. We can't have you sitting at the table looking like the help. It wouldn't fit the narrative." The narrative. I gripped the velvet box tighter. My knuckles turned white. "What narrative is that, Rachel? The one where you pretend you're rich? The one where you pretend you pay for this house?" Rachel's face hardened. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of expensive champagne on her breath hit me. "Don't start with that guilt trip. We are building a brand. Brian is a visionary. You wouldn't understand. You spent your life driving trucks. You have a small mind, Dad. You think small. We think big. But we can't think big with you sitting there talking about coupon clipping and gas prices. You're embarrassing." Embarrassing. The word hung in the humid air between us. I had built an empire. I had managed fleets of ships and hundreds of trucks. I had negotiated with union leaders and international CEOs. But to my daughter, I was just an embarrassing old man in a cheap shirt. I tried one last time. I brought a gift for Brian, a vintage watch. It means a lot to me. I held out the box. Rachel didn't even look at it. She snatched it from my hand. "A watch? Great. Probably some junk you found at a flea market. We don't need your old junk, Dad. We need you to leave. Now, before anyone sees you." She walked over to the large decorative planter by the door. It was one of those tall ceramic urns meant for fancy arrangements. Right now it was serving as a trash receptacle for a delivery box. She dropped the velvet box, my Hamilton watch, the symbol of my life's work, into the urn. It landed with a dull thud on top of a discarded Amazon package. "Go home, Dad," she said, wiping her hands as if she had touched something dirty. "We'll call you next week. Maybe we can do a barbecue or something. Something casual. Where you fit in." And then she turned around, grabbed the brass handle of the door, and slipped back inside. The lock clicked. The deadbolt slid home. I was left standing alone on the porch of the $2 million home I paid for, staring at the closed door. The jazz music filtered through the wood. I could hear Brian's booming laugh. I stood there for a long time. I looked down at my boots. They were clean. I had polished them this morning. I looked at my shirt. I had ironed it myself. I wasn't dirty. I wasn't smelly. I was just real. And reality was the one thing Rachel and Brian could not afford to have in their house. I should have turned around. I should have walked back to my truck, driven home to my small apartment, opened a can of soup, and watched reruns of old westerns until I fell asleep. That's what the old George would have done. The George who wanted to keep the peace. The George who felt guilty for working so much when Rachel was a child. The George who thought money could buy love, or at least buy closeness. But something snapped in me when that deadbolt slid shut. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a cable finally fraying and breaking under too much tension. I didn't leave. Instead, I stepped off the porch and walked into the mulch of the flower beds. I walked around the side of the house, my boots sinking into the soft, expensive soil. I wanted to see. I needed to see what was so important that a father had to be thrown out like garbage. I made my way to the backyard. The house had a massive wall of floor-to-ceiling glass doors that opened onto the patio. I stood behind a large manicured hedge of hydrangeas, hidden in the shadows of the late afternoon. I had a perfect view of the living room and the dining area. It was like watching a movie about people I didn't know. The interior was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, modern art on the walls, furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. And there were the people. About 12 of them. Men in Italian suits, women in cocktail dresses. They were holding glasses of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. And there, in the center of it all, was Brian, my son-in-law. He was standing at the head of the dining table raising a toast. He looked sleek, polished, and utterly fake. I couldn't hear every word through the glass, but the windows were cracked open slightly to let in the breeze. I moved closer, stepping carefully over the irrigation lines. I needed to hear. I leaned in. Brian's voice carried well. He had that salesman projection. To success, he was saying, beaming at the man to his right, a heavy-set fellow with a bald head. To pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. You know, when Rachel and I bought this place, people said we were crazy. They said the market was too volatile. But I have an instinct for value. I saw the potential. I put down the cash, I took the risk, and look where we are now. Pure equity. That's the Caldwell way. I felt the blood drain from my face. He put down the cash. He took the risk. I remembered the day we closed on this house. Brian had been sweating, terrified he wouldn't qualify even for the utilities. I had written a cashier's check for $400,000 for the down payment. I had signed the guarantor documents. I had set up the auto draft for the monthly payments because Brian said his commission checks were irregular. He was standing there drinking my wine in my house, claiming my success as his own. And Rachel was standing right next to him, smiling that plastic smile, nodding in agreement. She looked at the bald man, the bank director presumably, and said, "Absolutely. Brian is a genius with assets. We don't believe in handouts. We believe in hard work. We built this life from scratch. From scratch." The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in its absolute detachment from reality. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a notification from my bank, a standard automated text message I received on the 15th of every month. It read, "Scheduled transfer alert, $6,800 to Mortgage Servicing Solutions will be processed at midnight. Reply, stop to cancel or manage this payment." I stared at the screen. The blue light illuminated my face in the growing dimness of the garden. $6,800. That was the price of admission to this life. That was the cost of the roof over their heads, the floor under their feet, the walls that held their lives together. I looked through the glass again. Brian was refilling the bank director's glass. Rachel was laughing at something a woman in red said, throwing her head back in a gesture of carefree opulence. They looked so secure, so safe. They thought the world worked by magic. They thought the money just appeared because they deserved it. They thought the old man in the truck was just a nuisance, a relic, a source of funds that would flow forever, regardless of how they treated him. They were celebrating Father's Day by erasing the father who paid for the party. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought about Leo, my grandson. I hadn't seen him in the room. Where was he? Probably hiding in his room. He hated these parties. He was the only one in this house with a conscience, the only one who ever asked me how I was doing, the only one who liked my truck. If I did this, Leo would suffer too. But then I looked at Rachel again. She was gesturing towards the backyard, towards where I was hiding, though she couldn't see me. I heard her say, "We're thinking of putting in an infinity pool next month. Brian says the yard needs a focal point, an infinity pool, on my dime, while I was driving a truck with a cracked windshield." No. Enough was enough. I wasn't just an ATM, I was a man. I was a father. And a father's job isn't just to provide, it's to teach. And sometimes the lessons have to be hard. Sometimes you have to let the child fall so they learn that gravity is real. I looked at the text message again. Reply, stop to cancel. I typed S-T-O-P. I hit send. A second later, a confirmation popped up. Recurring transfer to Mortgage Servicing Solutions has been canceled. No funds will be sent. Please contact your branch if this was an error. It wasn't an error. It was the most deliberate thing I had done in years. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I took one last look at the party. "Enjoy the wine, Brian," I whispered to the glass. "It's going to be the last vintage you taste for a very long time." I turned away from the window and began to walk back toward the driveway. But as I passed the kitchen window, I heard something. Voices. Hushed, urgent voices. It wasn't the party chatter. It was coming from the side patio, a small smoking area screened off from the main garden. I paused. I recognized Brian's voice. It wasn't the booming, confident voice from the dining room. It was low, tense, and nasty. I crept closer, pressing my back against the brick siding of the house. The smell of cigarette smoke wafted through the trellis. "Did the old man leave?" Brian asked. I heard the click of a lighter. "Yes," Rachel replied. "I handled it." "He's gone." "Good," Brian said. He exhaled a long breath. That was close. If Sterling saw him, if Sterling realized that the house isn't in our name, that the assets aren't ours. The loan is dead, Rachel. The business loan. $500,000. We need that money. The bookies are getting impatient. My breathing stopped. Bookies. Gambling. I knew Brian liked to play poker, but this sounded different. This sounded dangerous. "Don't worry," Rachel said, her voice soothing but cold. "Sterling thinks you're a heavy hitter. He thinks the old man is just senile. That's the angle, Brian. We stick to that. My father is losing his grip. He's confused. That's why his name is on the old paperwork. But we are taking over. We are getting power of attorney. Next week, I'm taking him to Dr. Eris. I told him Dad is having episodes, forgetting things, getting aggressive. Dr. Eris will sign the competency waiver. Once we have that, we sign the house over to us, we use it as collateral for the loan, and we ship Dad off to that facility in Nevada. The cheap one. State-funded. He won't know the difference." I felt like I had been punched in the chest. A physical blow. The air left my lungs. They weren't just using me. They weren't just ungrateful. They were conspiring against me. They were planning to have me declared incompetent. They were planning to steal the house legally. They were planning to lock me away in a state facility in Nevada, thousands of miles away from my home, my friends, my life, just so they could pay off gambling debts, just so they could keep pretending to be rich. I stood frozen in the bushes. My hands were shaking. Not from age, from rage. A cold, hard rage that I hadn't felt since my days on the docks dealing with corrupt union bosses who tried to extort my drivers. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was war. And they had no idea who they had just declared war on. They thought they were dealing with a confused old man. They forgot that I was the shark who ate the other sharks to get to the top of the logistics world. I had gone soft. I had gone quiet. But the shark was still there, and he smelled blood. I was about to turn and storm into the party to confront them right there, to scream the truth in front of their precious bank director. But I stopped myself. No. That would be emotional. That would be messy. They would spin it. They would say, "Look, he's shouting. He's aggressive, just like we said." It would play right into their hands. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be colder. I needed to destroy them completely, and I needed to do it in a way that left no room for doubt. I stepped back from the trellis. I moved silently through the grass back toward my truck. My mind was racing, calculating, planning. I needed information. I needed leverage. And I needed it tonight. As I reached the front of the house, the side door of the garage opened. I froze. A figure stepped out carrying a heavy bag of trash. It was Leo. my grandson. He was 16, tall and lanky with hair that fell over his eyes. He looked miserable. He dumped the bag in the bin and turned around. He saw me. He didn't jump. He didn't yell. He just stopped. "Grandpa," he whispered. His eyes widened. "I thought, Mom said you left." I stepped out of the shadows. I put a finger to my lips. "I'm here, Leo." I heard them. "I know what they are doing." Leo's face crumpled. He looked like he was about to cry. He walked over to me quickly, looking back at the house to make sure no one was watching. "Grandpa, you have to run. You have to get out of here. They are crazy." Dad is in trouble. Bad trouble. There are men calling the house. Scary men. And Mom, she's telling everyone you have dementia. She's practicing the story. She tells her friends you forget who she is. It's a lie. I tell them it's a lie, but they tell me to shut up, or they'll take away my college fund. I put my hands on Leo's shoulders. He was trembling. "They threatened your college fund." Leo looked down. "There is no college fund, Grandpa. I heard them talking. Dad gambled it. It's gone. All of it. That's why they need the loan. They need to cover the losses before anyone finds out. They are going to sell your truck too. They said it's an eyesore. They said they can get $500 for it for scrap metal. They stole my grandson's future." That was the final straw. The mortgage was one thing. The disrespect was another. But stealing from a child, stealing the future. I had set aside money for, I felt a calm settle over me. It was the calm of a general looking at a battlefield and knowing exactly where to drop the bomb. "Listen to me, Leo," I said, my voice steady and low. "I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me?" Leo nodded, wiping his eyes. "Yes, Grandpa." "Good. Go back inside. Don't say a word. Don't act different. Just watch. And when I come back, I want you to stand by the door. Can you do that? Come back, you're coming back." "Oh yes, Leo, I'm coming back. I'm going to go get some things. I'm going to make a phone call. And then I'm coming back to this party. And I promise you, by the time the sun goes down, everything is going to change." Leo looked at me. For the first time in a long time, I saw hope in his eyes. "Okay, Grandpa. I trust you." He turned and ran back into the garage. I walked to my truck. I climbed in and shut the door. I didn't start the engine yet. I pulled out my phone again. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang once, twice. A voice answered. A deep, gravelly voice. "Leonard Ross." "Talk to me." "Leonard," I said, "it's George. I need you to wake up. I need you to open the safe. And I need you to bring the file on Brian's background check. The one we made when he married Rachel. The one I buried because I wanted to give him a chance. Dig it up. And Leonard. Bring the police, we have a fraud case, a big one." I started the engine. The Ford roared to life. I wasn't an embarrassing old man anymore. I was George Caldwell, and I was about to foreclose on my daughter's life. I crouched lower behind the hydrangeas, the scent of damp mulch and expensive fertilizer filling my nose. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from the exertion of hiding, but from the icy dread that had seized my chest. I had just canceled the mortgage payment, a small act of rebellion, but what I was hearing now paralyzed me. The conversation drifting through the lattice of the patio was not just disrespectful. It was a conspiracy. It was the sound of my own flesh and blood plotting my demise. Brian was pacing. I could hear the click of his dress shoes on the pavers, a frantic staccato rhythm. He sounded like a cornered animal. "Rachel, we don't have time for a slow play," he hissed. His voice was trembling, stripping away the confident veneer he had worn inside the house. "I got another call from Salvo this morning. You know what he said. He said he knows where Leo goes to school. He said accidents happen to teenagers who cross the street without looking. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Salvo. That wasn't a bank. That wasn't a creditor. That was the underground. That was the kind of name you whispered in back alleys near the docks where I used to work. My son-in-law wasn't just bad with money. He was in deep with loan sharks. Dangerous ones. Rachel's voice was calm, terrifyingly so. It was the voice of a general arranging troops completely detached from the human cost. "Stop panicking, Brian," she said, the flick of her lighter punctuating her words. "Salvo will wait if he knows the money is coming. We just need to show him the asset. We need to show him we have the deed." "But we don't have the deed," Brian snapped, his voice rising in pitch. "The old man has it. It's in that trust. And as long as he's breathing and lucid, we can't touch the equity. We are sitting on $2 million of dirt, and we can't access a cent of it to save my legs." "That's why Tuesday is the end game," Rachel said. I could hear her exhaling smoke, a long, slow sound. "I already set it up. I told you. Dr. Eris is ready. He's not cheap, Brian. He's charging us 10 grand for the signature, but he'll certify anything I put in front of him. I'm going to tell Dad we need to sign some updated insurance forms. You know how he is. He doesn't read the fine print anymore. He trusts me. He thinks I'm his little girl." She laughed then. A dry, humorless sound that made my blood run cold. It was the laugh of someone who had dissected her father's love and found it useful only as a weakness to be exploited. "The document isn't for insurance, obviously. It's a durable power of attorney effective immediately. It gives me control over his medical decisions, his finances, and his living situation. Once the ink is dry, George Caldwell ceases to be a person. He becomes a line item in my ledger." I felt a wave of nausea. Durable power of attorney. It was the legal equivalent of a lobotomy. She wanted to strip me of my agency, my rights, my very voice. But Brian wasn't satisfied. "Even with the power of attorney, Rachel, what do we do with him? We can't have him living in the apartment. If he figures it out, if he calls his lawyer, he won't call anyone?" Rachel interrupted, her tone sharp. "Because he won't be in the apartment. I made the arrangements this morning. There's a transport van scheduled to pick him up 1 hour after the appointment with Dr. Eris. They specialize in difficult patients. They'll sedate him for the trip." "Sedate him," Brian repeated. "Where are they taking him?" Rachel paused. I imagined her smiling that cold plastic smile. "Silver Creek State Facility, in Nevada." Silver Creek. The name sounded innocent enough, but I knew what state facilities in rural Nevada were like. They were warehouses for the forgotten. Places where the indigent and the unwanted were stacked in hallways, medicated into oblivion, and left to rot in soiled sheets. They were places people went to die, not to live. "Nevada," Brian whispered. That's far." "It has to be far," Rachel said. "If we put him in a local home, people might visit. Leo might try to ride his bike there. We need him gone, Brian. Gone. Silver Creek is perfect. It's understaffed. It's in the middle of nowhere, and they don't allow cell phones for patients. Once he's through those doors, he's a ghost. We sell his apartment. We liquidate his savings. We mortgage this house to the hilt to pay off Salvo, and we live our lives." "But the cost?" Brian asked. "Nursing homes are expensive." "Not this one," Rachel replied dismissively. "It's a Medicaid dump. We surrender his Social Security check to them and they keep him. It won't cost us a dime of the inheritance. We keep everything. The business sale money, the investments, the real estate. It's all ours. We just have to survive until Tuesday." I closed my eyes, feeling the tears track through the dust on my face. It wasn't just greed. It was hatred. You don't send someone you love, or even someone you tolerate, to a place like Silver Creek. You send garbage there. To my daughter, I was just a complication to be disposed of. She had calculated the value of my life and decided it was less than the cost of her husband's gambling debts. Brian spoke again, his voice lower, more conspiratorial. How much exactly does the old man have left? I know he sold the company for $60 million, but he acts like he's broke. Does he really have it, or did he blow it all on charity? He has it, Rachel assured him. I saw a statement on his desk last Christmas when he went to the bathroom. He's hoarding it. He has accounts he doesn't talk about. Millions, Brian. He sits on millions of dollars while we struggle to pay for the country club. It's selfish. It's disgusting. He doesn't even enjoy it. He drives that stupid truck and eats at diners. He doesn't deserve that money. We do. We have vision. We have taste. I felt a sudden fierce pride in my frugality. Yes, I had millions, but I didn't hoard it. I invested it. I donated it. I built scholarships. I protected it so that my family would be safe for generations. I thought I was building a legacy for them. I didn't realize I was building a target on my own back. Are you sure about Leo? Brian asked, shifting the topic. The kid is nosy. He likes the old man. If he starts asking questions, I'll handle Leo, Rachel snapped. I told him if he keeps asking about his grandfather, we're sending him to military school. That shut him up. Besides, once the money comes in, we'll buy him that car he wants. He'll get over it. Everyone has a price, Brian. Even our son. That was the moment the sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They were willing to corrupt my grandson. They were willing to bribe him with the spoils of my destruction. They were a cancer. And you don't negotiate with cancer. You cut it out. I checked the time on my phone. 5:15. The partners inside were probably wondering where their hosts were. I had heard enough. I had the names. Salvo, Dr. Aris, Silver Creek. I had the timeline. Tuesday. And I had the motive. $350,000 in gambling debt, disguised as a business loan. I slowly backed away from the trellis, careful not to snap a twig. My knees creaked, a reminder of my age, but I felt stronger than I had in years. I wasn't a victim. I was a witness. And I was about to become the judge, jury, and executioner of their lifestyle. I crept back toward the front of the house, my mind racing. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was alone. They forgot that before I was a father, before I was a grandfather, I was a man who ran the toughest shipping lanes on the East Coast. I knew how to deal with threats. I reached my truck and opened the door silently. I didn't just need a lawyer. I needed an army. I needed to secure my assets. I needed to protect Leo, and I needed to ensure that when Tuesday came, the only people getting transported were Rachel and Brian. I sat in the driver's seat, the leather cracked and familiar against my back. I looked at the house one last time. It looked beautiful in the golden hour light. A perfect American dream. But inside it was rotten. I pulled out my phone and dialed Leonard. I heard you the first time, George, Leonard said, his voice gruff. I'm already pulling the files, but you need to know something. I just ran a quick check on Brian's name through my contacts at the precinct. What did you find? I asked, starting the engine. There's a lien on the house, George. A fraudulent one. Someone signed your name 6 months ago to secure a high-interest loan. A secondary mortgage. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Rachel. She had already started. She had forged my signature. That's a felony, Leonard, I said. It is, Leonard agreed. And George, the creditor isn't a bank. It's an LLC linked to the Salvatore crime family. Salvo. The name Rachel had mentioned. They hadn't just planned to rob me. They had already sold a piece of me to the mob. Bring the police, Leonard, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. And bring a forensic accountant. I'm going to dismantle them piece by piece. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home to hide. I was going to war. and I had a Father's Day surprise that none of them would ever forget. I sat there in the idling truck, the vibration of the engine humming through the steering wheel and into my hands. My knuckles were white as I gripped the leather, my mind still reeling from Leonard's words about the mob lien. I was ready to peel out of that driveway and burn the asphalt all the way to the police station. But then a tap on the passenger window made me jump. It was a frantic, desperate sound. I looked over and saw Leo. He hadn't gone back inside like I told him. He was standing there in the mulch, his face pressed against the glass, tears streaming down his cheeks so hard they were leaving streaks on the window. He looked terrified, like a kid who had seen a ghost. I leaned over and unlocked the door. He scrambled inside, practically falling into the passenger seat, and slammed the door shut, curling his lanky frame into a ball as if he were trying to disappear into the upholstery. "Leo," I said, my voice sharp with alarm. "I told you to go inside. If they see you out here—" "I can't, Grandpa." He sobbed, his chest heaving. "I can't go back in there. They're laughing. They're laughing about you. Dad is telling the bank director that you used to be a janitor. He's making fun of your hands. He said you have dirt under your fingernails that never comes out." I felt a fresh wave of anger, but I pushed it down. "Let them laugh, Leo. It doesn't matter. Sticks and stones." It's not just that. Leo interrupted, his voice cracking. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "Grandpa, I have to tell you something else. Something I was too scared to tell you before. I didn't want you to be sad, but if you're going to fight them, you need to know. You need to know how bad it really is." I turned off the engine. The silence that filled the cab was heavy and suffocating. "Tell me, son." Leo took a shaky breath, wiping his nose on the sleeve of his dress shirt. "You know your record collection, the vintage jazz albums, the ones you and Grandma used to dance to in the living room." My heart skipped a beat. "My vinyls. That collection was my sanctuary. First pressings of Miles Davis, Coltrane, Etta James. My wife Martha had bought me the turntable for our 10th anniversary. After she passed, I would sit in my apartment on Friday nights, pour a glass of scotch, and just listen. It was the only time I felt close to her. It was the only time the silence of being a widower didn't feel so loud. I had brought them to the house a few months ago because my apartment had a small leak in the ceiling, and I didn't want to risk water damage. Rachel had promised to keep them safe in the climate-controlled den. "What about them, Leo?" I asked, dread coiling in my gut. "Did they get damaged? They're gone," Grandpa Leo whispered. "Mom sold them 2 weeks ago." "Sold them?" Repeated the words, feeling foreign in my mouth. "But those aren't worth that much money. Not enough to pay off a gambling debt." "Why would she—" "She didn't sell them for the money," Leo said, and this part hurt worse than any physical blow. "She sold them because she said they smelled like old people. She said the covers were musty and they ruined the aesthetic of the den. She called a guy from a used record store in the city. He gave her $50 for the whole box. $50, Grandpa. For everything. $50. My life's soundtrack. The music that had played at my wedding. The songs I had rocked Rachel to sleep with when she was a baby. $50. She hadn't sold them out of desperation. She had sold them out of contempt. She had erased my history, my memories of her mother for the price of a cheap lunch, just because she didn't like the way they looked on her shelf. I stared out the windshield, my vision blurring. I could see Martha's face laughing as she tried to teach me to foxtrot in our tiny first apartment. I could hear the crackle of the needle on the vinyl. Gone. It was all gone. Treated like trash. Just like me. Leo reached out and touched my arm. His hand was shaking. "And Grandpa, there's one more thing. You know how you always ask me why I don't introduce you to my friends from school? Why I never bring them around when you visit? I nodded slowly. I had always assumed it was just teenage embarrassment. Kids don't want to hang out with old folks. I understood that. It's not because I don't want to, Leo said, his voice fierce now. It's because Mom forbade it. Forbade it. She gave me a rule, Leo said, looking down at his lap. She sat me down before my birthday party last year. She said that if any of my friends from the academy came over, I wasn't allowed to call you Grandpa. She said I had to call you George. Or better yet, I had to pretend you were the hired help. She said if I told anyone you were my grandfather, she would pull me out of the soccer team. She said having a blue-collar grandfather would ruin our brand. That people would think we were new money trash if they knew where we came from. The air in the truck felt thin, like I was on top of a mountain. Ruin the brand. I was the brand. I was the one who built the foundation they were standing on. And she had taught my grandson to be ashamed of me. She had forced him to deny his own blood to protect her social standing. I looked at Leo. Really looked at him. I saw the shame burning in his cheeks. I saw the guilt he had been carrying, a burden no 16-year-old should ever have to bear. He wasn't just a victim of their financial abuse. He was a victim of their emotional warfare. They were teaching him to be a liar. They were teaching him that love was conditional on status. They were trying to turn him into them. And that terrified me more than the nursing home, more than the mob. Because if they succeeded, if they broke his spirit, then the Caldwell legacy really would be dead. I reached across the console and grabbed Leo's hand. His fingers were cold. I squeezed them tight, feeling the calluses on my own palm, the rough skin that Rachel despised. Listen to me, Leo. I said, my voice rough with emotion. Look at me. He looked up, tears still spilling from his eyes. You didn't do anything wrong, I told him. You hear me, none of this is your fault. You were protecting yourself. You were surviving. That's what kids do, but that stops today. Leo sniffled. But Grandpa, they're my parents. If they go to jail, if we lose the house, what happens to me? I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to face him fully. I am not going to lie to you, Leo. Things are going to get ugly. Your parents, they made choices. Bad choices. Criminal choices. And when the sun comes up tomorrow, their world is going to look very different. But I need you to know one thing. I paused, making sure he was listening. You are safe. As long as I have breath in my lungs, you are safe. I don't care if I have to spend every last dime of my savings. I don't care if I have to buy a whole new house just for you. You are not going down with this ship. You are coming with me. Leo's eyes widened. With you, what? Wherever we want, I said. I have resources, Leo. Real resources. Not this fake credit card debt life your parents are living. I can take care of you. I can send you to college. I can buy you that car. But more importantly, I can give you a home where you don't have to lie. Where you don't have to be ashamed. Where you can listen to jazz records and wear whatever shirt you want. Leo stared at me, processing this. For the first time, he was seeing me not as the old man who needed help, but as the patriarch who could provide it. Do you trust me, Leo? I asked. He nodded slowly, at first, then vigorously. I trust you, Grandpa. Okay, I said. Then here's the plan. I need you to go back in there. I know it's hard. I know you want to run. But I need a man on the inside. I need you to go to your room, pack a bag. Just the essentials. Your laptop, your school books, anything you can't replace. Hide it under your bed. When the police come, and they are coming, Leo, I want you to be ready to walk out that front door and never look back, the police, Leo whispered. Yes, I said grimly. It has to be this way. But don't worry about them. They aren't coming for you. They are coming to clean up the mess. You just keep your head down. And when you see me walk through those doors again, you know it's time." Leo took a deep breath. He wiped his face with his sleeve again, squaring his shoulders. He looked older suddenly. The baby fat was gone from his face, replaced by the hard lines of someone who has had to grow up too fast. "Okay," he said. "I can do it. For you, Grandpa. And I'm sorry about the records. I tried to hide one. I saved the Coltrane one. It's under my mattress." I felt a tear slip down my own cheek then. He had saved one. He had risked his mother's wrath to save a piece of me. "That's the best news I've heard all day, son," I said, my voice thick. "You keep that safe. We'll listen to it tonight." Leo opened the door. He paused on the running board, looking back at me. "Grandpa, yeah, Leo, happy Father's Day." He slammed the door and ran back toward the garage, disappearing into the shadows. I watched him go, a fierce protectiveness burning in my chest like a furnace. The sorrow was gone. The hesitation was gone. They had taken my house. They had taken my records. They had tried to take my dignity. But they tried to corrupt my grandson. And for that, there would be no mercy. I put the truck in gear and peeled out of the spot, the tires chirping on the pavement. I wasn't driving to the police station anymore. I was driving to Leonard's office to sign the paperwork that would strip Rachel and Brian of every cent they thought they owned. I was going to cut the financial cord, and I was going to watch them fall. And then I was going to catch my grandson. I drove 3 blocks before I pulled over into the empty parking lot of a closed elementary school. The sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, a fitting backdrop for the violence I was about to inflict on my daughter's life. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was the adrenaline of the hunt. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the predator. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a burner phone. It was a habit from the old days when union negotiations got heated and lines got tapped. I kept it for emergencies. This was an emergency. I dialed a number I had memorized 6 months ago, when the first inkling of doubt had crept into my mind. Back then, it was just a feeling. A missed call here, a strange look there. I had hired Elias, a private investigator who used to work fraud cases for the insurance companies before he went private. He was expensive, he was cynical, and he was the best. I had put him on a retainer just to watch, just to keep an eye on things. I had hoped he would find nothing. I had prayed he would tell me I was just a paranoid old man. I was wrong. Elias answered on the first ring. I didn't have to say who it was. He knew the number. "It's time, Elias," I said, my voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. "Tell me everything. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't protect my feelings. I want the black file." I could hear the rustle of papers on the other end. Elias cleared his throat. It was a heavy, ominous sound. "You sure you want this over the phone, George? It's ugly. It's uglier than we thought." "I'm sitting in my truck 3 streets away from their house," I replied. "They just kicked me out of a party I paid for. They are planning to commit me to a state facility in Nevada next Tuesday. I don't have time for a coffee meeting. Give it to me. Now." There was a pause, then the sound of a heavy sigh. "All right, let's start with the son-in-law. Brian isn't just a bad gambler, George. He's a criminal. I've been tracking his movements for the last 3 weeks. You know that business loan he keeps talking about? The one he says is for expanding his real estate portfolio." "Yeah," I said. 500 grand. He says he's waiting on the bank." "There is no bank," Elias said flatly. "The bank denied him 4 months ago. His credit score is sub 500. He's toxic. No legitimate institution will touch him. But he needed the money to cover his tracks with the bookies in Atlantic City. So he went to a hard money lender, a guy named Vinny the Shark. I wish I was making that name up, but I'm not. He runs a shell company out of a strip mall in Jersey. Predatory lending. $200,000 at 40% interest compounding weekly. 200,000, I whispered. But he told Rachel he needed 5. He lied to her too, Elias said. Or maybe they are lying to each other. But here is the kicker, George. Vinny doesn't lend that kind of cash on a handshake. He needs collateral, hard assets. And Brian doesn't own anything. The house is in your trust. The cars are leased. So Brian got creative. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Creative how? I'm looking at a digital copy of a promissory note right now, Elias said. I pulled it from Vinny's server an hour ago. It puts up the deed to 24 Oak Street as collateral. And at the bottom right next to the notary stamp is a signature. It says George Caldwell. The air in the cab turned to ice. He forged my signature. It's a good forgery, Elias admitted. He must have practiced. But the notary. That's where he messed up. The notary is a guy named Pete who lost his license 3 years ago for fraud. It's a fake notarization on a forged document securing an illegal loan. That's 3 felonies, George. Minimum. If you hand this to the district attorney, Brian goes away for 10 to 15 years. No parole. I closed my eyes. My signature. The signature that had signed payroll checks for 300 families. The signature that had authorized charitable grants. The signature that was my bond, my word, my honor. He had stolen it. He had traced it onto a piece of dirty paper to sell my house to a loan shark. Send it to me, I said. Send me the image. I want to see it. Sent, Elias said. But George, that's not the worst part. How can it get worse than my son-in-law selling my house to the mob? Because of your daughter, Elias said quietly. I braced myself. I thought I was ready. I thought knowing she wanted to send me to a nursing home was the bottom of the barrel. I was wrong. The barrel had a false bottom. Rachel knows about the gambling, Elias said. She knows Brian is drowning. She's been moving money out of their joint accounts into a private crypto wallet for months. She's skimming from him while he steals from you. But she's not just hiding money. She's hedging her bets emotionally. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. I felt it in my gut. She's seeing someone, Elias said. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. She's been having lunches. Long lunches. 3 times a week. With a man named Weston. Do you know him? Weston. The name was familiar. He was a competitor from my old days. A man who had tried to buy my company in a hostile takeover back in the 90s. A man with no morals and too much hair gel. He was in his 60s now, still rich, still slimy. She's meeting Weston, I repeated. Why? She's pitching herself, George. I have transcripts of their text messages. She's telling him that Brian is a loser. She's telling him that she's about to come into a massive inheritance. She's telling him that once her father is out of the picture, she's going to be a very wealthy single woman. She's lining up her next husband before she's even buried the first one. And she's using your money as the bait. I felt like vomiting. My daughter wasn't just greedy. She was a mercenary. She was selling herself to my enemy using my death as the dowry. She was playing both sides against the middle, and I was the currency. Read me the last text, I commanded. I need to hear it. Elias hesitated. George, you don't want to read it, Elias. All right. Sent yesterday at 2 p.m. It says, Don't worry, darling. The old man is on his last legs. He's confused and weak. Once I sign the papers on Tuesday, I'll have power of attorney. I'll liquidate the assets, dump the loser husband, and we can finally take that trip to Como. Just wait for me. The silence in the truck was absolute. I looked at the dashboard, at the dusty odometer that showed 200,000 miles. Those miles were my life. They were the distance I had traveled to give her everything. piano lessons, private schools, a pony she rode twice. And this was the return on investment. A text message to a rival promising to dump her husband and spend my corpse's money in Italy. She called me weak, I said softly. Yeah, Elias said. She did. She's wrong, I said. I know she is George. What do you want to do? I have the file ready. I can send it to your lawyer. I can send it to the police. Or I can bring it to you. Bring it to me, I said. I want the physical file. I want the paper in my hand. I want to throw it on the table and watch them choke on it. Meet me at Leonard's office. I'm going there now to draft the eviction notice. Eviction? Elias asked. You're kicking them out tonight. I'm not just kicking them out, I said, starting the truck. I'm erasing them. They want to play games with titles and deeds. Fine. I'm going to show them what real ownership looks like. I'm going to show them that you don't forge a man's name and expect to keep his house. I hung up the phone. My hand was steady now. The shaking had stopped. The grief had burned away, leaving only cold, hard ash. I looked at the image Elias had sent to my phone. The forged signature stared back at me. It was shaky. A poor imitation. It looked like the signature of a weak man. I wasn't that man. I pulled out of the parking lot. The sun was almost gone. The sky was a deep indigo. It was the color of a bruise. It was fitting. I drove fast, the old truck groaning as I pushed it past the speed limit. I had a meeting with a lawyer. I had a meeting with the private investigator. And then I had a dinner date. I imagined the scene back at the house. Brian sweating through his suit as he tried to impress the bank director. Rachel flirting with the guests, checking her phone to see if Weston had replied, plotting her escape to Como. They were drinking my wine. They were eating my food. They were sitting on my furniture. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over. They thought they had checkmated the king. But they forgot one thing. The king was the one who built the board, and the king had just decided to flip the table. I reached for the radio and turned it up. It was an old jazz station, Coltrane, the same album Rachel had sold for 50 cents. The saxophone wailed a sound of pure, unadulterated power. I let it fill the cab. I let it fill my soul. I'm coming, Rachel, I said to the empty road. I'm coming, Brian. And I'm bringing the storm with me. I dialed Leonard's number again. He answered on the first ring. I'm at the office, George, he said. The lights are on, the coffee is brewing, and the police captain is on his way. He's a friend of mine. He's interested in the forgery. Good, I said. Tell him to bring handcuffs. 2 pairs. Why 2? Leonard asked. 1 for the thief, I said, and 1 for the accomplice. Because tonight, nobody walks away clean. I hung up and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Father's Day dinner was about to get very interesting. I wasn't just bringing a side dish. I was bringing the main course. And it was going to be served cold. I sat in the cab of my truck, the engine idling with a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of my boots. The parking lot of the elementary school was empty, a vast expanse of cracked asphalt, illuminated by a single flickering street lamp. It was a fitting place to end one life and begin another. The George Caldwell who baked cookies and signed checks with a smile was gone. He had died the moment I heard my daughter plotting to lock me away in a warehouse for the dying. In his place sat the man I used to be 30 years ago, the man who built a shipping empire from a single tugboat, the man who stared down union bosses, corrupt port authorities, and corporate raiders without blinking. The chairman. I picked up the phone. My hand didn't shake. It was steady as a rock. I dialed Leonard's personal line. He picked up on the first ring, as if he had been sitting by the receiver waiting for the order to drop the guillotine. I am here, George, Leonard said. His voice was crisp, professional, devoid of the pity I had heard earlier. He knew the shift had happened. He knew who he was talking to. Execute. Clause 13, I said. My voice was low, flat, and cold as the Atlantic in December. There was a pause on the line. A heavy, pregnant silence. Clause 13 was the nuclear option. It was a provision we had written into the Caldwell Family Trust 15 years ago, a fail-safe designed for a worst-case scenario I never thought I would see. It was the complete and immediate revocation of all beneficiary privileges based on acts of moral turpitude, criminal conduct, or gross ingratitude. It was a legal kill switch. "Are you sure?" George Leonard asked. He wasn't questioning my resolve. He was doing his due diligence. He was making sure the record would show I was of sound mind. Once I pull this lever, the machinery doesn't stop. It strips them of everything. The monthly stipends, the access to the capital, the health insurance, the club memberships. It even voids their claim to the trust's real estate assets. They will be destitute within the hour. I looked out the windshield at the darkening sky. I thought of my record collection sold for $50. I thought of Leo being forced to lie about his grandfather. I thought of the nursing home in Nevada. "I am sure, Leonard," I replied. "I want you to freeze the main operating accounts immediately. Flag every credit card issued to Rachel and Brian as stolen or compromised. I want their cards to decline the next time they try to buy a bottle of water." "Done," Leonard said. I can hear the keystrokes on his end. "I'm locking the accounts now. What about the house?" "The house is owned by the trust," I said. "They are tenants at will, and they have violated the terms of their tenancy by conducting illegal activities on the premises. That loan shark lien Brian tried to secure. That's criminal fraud involving trust property. That voids their lease effective immediately." "I want an eviction notice," drafted Leonard. "Not a 30-day notice. An immediate notice to vacate due to criminal negligence and fraud. I want them out tonight." "Tonight," Leonard repeated. "That's aggressive. The police usually require 24 hours for a civil standby. This isn't civil, Leonard." I snapped the old iron coming into my voice. "This is criminal. Brian forged my signature on a deed he doesn't own. That's grand larceny and forgery. I don't want a civil standby. I want an arrest. When we walk through those doors, I want the police to be ready to take him into custody. The eviction isn't a request. It's a crime scene cleanup." "I understand," Leonard said. "I'll call Captain Miller. He owes us a favor from the Port Authority investigation last year. He'll have a squad car meet us at the property." "What about Rachel?" The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Rachel. The little girl I had taught to ride a bike. The woman who was texting her lover about spending my dead money in Italy. "Rachel is a co-conspirator," I said. "She knew about the forgery. She facilitated it. She's skimming money. Cut her off, Leonard. Cut her off completely. Revoke her access to the educational trust for Leo too. I don't want her touching a dime of my grandson's future. I will take over as the custodial guardian for Leo's accounts." "Understood," Leonard said. The typing on the other end was furious now. "George, I have to ask. The partners, the investors at the party. This is going to be a very public spectacle." "Let it be public," I said. "Let them see. They think they are drinking wine with a successful real estate mogul. I want them to see him in handcuffs. I want them to know they were doing business with a fraud. It's better they find out now than when he steals their money too. I'm doing them a favor." I could feel the old instincts taking over. It was the same feeling I used to get before a hostile takeover. The narrowing of focus. The suppression of emotion. The absolute clarity of the objective. I wasn't a father punishing a child. I was a CEO excising a corrupt division. "I have the forensic accountant's report you asked for earlier," Leonard added. "It's worse than we thought. Brian didn't just lose the college fund. He leveraged the life insurance policies you took out for them. He borrowed against the cash value. If he dies tomorrow, the payout is zero. He hollowed them out, I whispered. He hollowed us out from the inside like a termite. Yes, Leonard said. And Rachel signed off on it. Her signature is on the authorization forms. She helped him drain the policies to pay for that Mercedes she drives. That was the final nail. There was no doubt left. No lingering hope that maybe she was just a victim of her husband's addiction. She was an active participant. She had sold her own security, her son's security, for a luxury car. Repo it, I said. What? Leonard asked. The car. It's leased under the company name, isn't it? My old company's shell. Technically, yes, Leonard said. We kept the holding company active for tax purposes. The lease is in the corporate name. Then repossess it, I ordered. Call the recovery team. Have a tow truck waiting down the street. When they get kicked out of the house, I don't want them driving away in a $60,000 car paid for by my sweat. I want them walking. You're going scorched earth, George Leonard said softly. There was a note of awe in his voice. They wanted to bury me in the desert, Leonard, I said. They wanted to erase me. I'm just returning the favor. I'm erasing their lifestyle. I'm erasing the lie. I'll have the papers ready for your signature when you get here, Leonard said. And George? Be careful. A cornered rat bites. I'm not afraid of rats, I said. I'm the exterminator. I hung up the phone and threw it onto the passenger seat. I sat there for a moment in the silence. I looked at my hands. They were large, scarred, weathered hands. Hands that had pulled ropes, turned wrenches, and steered ships through hurricanes. Rachel had called them dirty. She had been ashamed of them. I clenched them into fists. These hands built the roof over her head, and tonight these hands were going to tear it down. I put the truck into gear and pulled out of the lot. The streetlights were humming to life overhead, casting long orange shadows across the road. I drove with precision, obeying every traffic law, signaling every turn. I wasn't in a rush anymore. The timeline was set. The pieces were moving. The law was on my side. As I drove toward Leonard's office, I let the persona of the retired, gentle grandfather slip away completely. I locked him in a box in the back of my mind. He was too soft for what had to be done. Tonight, I needed to be the man who fired his own brother-in-law for skimming off the top in '98. I needed to be the man who sued the city and won. I needed to be the Iron Fist. I reached for the radio again, but I turned it off. I didn't want music. I wanted silence. I wanted to focus. I ran through the plan one more time. The police would secure the perimeter. Leonard would serve the papers. I would deliver the message. And Leo would be safe. I turned the corner onto Main Street. Leonard's office building loomed ahead, a modern glass structure that I owned 50% of. The lights on the top floor were blazing. Leonard was working. The team was assembling. I pulled into the reserved spot right in front of the entrance. I stepped out of the truck and slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I didn't adjust my shirt. I didn't check my hair. I walked into the lobby with the stride of a man who owns the pavement beneath his feet. The security guard looked up, startled. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, scrambling to stand up. "Good evening, sir. We weren't expecting you." I nodded briefly. "I'm here to work Sam. Send the elevator down." I rode the lift to the penthouse suite. The doors opened and I stepped into the plush reception area of Ross & Associates. Leonard was standing there holding a thick file folder. Two other men stood behind him. One was in a suit, looking like a Fed. The other was in a police uniform. "Captain Miller, George," Captain Miller said, extending a hand. Leonard told me the situation. "I'm sorry it's come to this." "Don't be," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "It's been coming for a long time. I just didn't want to see it." Do you have the evidence? Miller asked. I pointed to the file in Leonard's hand. The forged deed, the loan shark contracts, the unauthorized wire transfers. It's all there. Miller opened the file and scanned the first few pages. He whistled low. This is a mess, George. This guy Brian, he's looking at serious time. And your daughter, if she signed those insurance withdrawals knowing they were fraudulent, she's an accessory to grand larceny. Book them both, I said. I don't care who they are. I care about what they did. Miller nodded. We'll follow your lead. We'll wait for your signal. I turned to Leonard. The eviction notice. Here, Leonard said, handing me a crisp legal document. Notice to vacate immediately. Failure to comply will result in arrest for trespassing. I took the paper. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. Let's go, I said. The party is just getting started, and I have a toast I want to make. We walked out of the office, a phalanx of justice moving toward the elevators. I checked my watch. 7:30. The sun was down. The darkness had arrived. And so had I. The police cruiser followed my truck, its lights off a silent predator in the rearview mirror. Leonard rode shotgun with me, his briefcase resting heavily on his lap. We didn't speak. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt as we turned back onto Oak Street. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the manicured lawns. It felt like the calm before a hurricane. I pulled up to the curb directly in front of number 24. I didn't park 3 houses away this time. I parked right in front of the driveway, blocking in a silver Lexus and a black BMW. I turned off the engine. The silence was absolute for a moment, then broken by the distant sound of laughter from inside the house. They were still celebrating, still drinking my champagne, still living in the delusion that I was gone. Leonard looked at me. Ready, George? I nodded. Let's do it. We stepped out of the truck. Captain Miller and 2 uniformed officers got out of the cruiser behind us. They adjusted their belts, their faces grim. I walked up the driveway, my boots heavy on the pavement. I didn't go to the doorbell this time. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my key ring. The key to the front door was there, a simple brass key that I had kept on my ring for 5 years just in case. Rachel thought I had lost it. She thought she had changed the locks, but she had only changed the back door lock. She was lazy, and that laziness was about to cost her everything. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open. It swung inward silently, revealing the foyer bathed in warm golden light. The party was in full swing. The jazz music was louder now, a saxophone solo winding through the air. Voices rose and fell in a murmur of polite conversation. I stepped inside. Leonard and the officers stayed on the porch just out of sight, waiting for my signal. I walked through the foyer past the marble console table where Rachel kept her keys, past the mirror where she checked her makeup. I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass. I didn't look like a janitor. I looked like a storm. I entered the living room. The guests were gathered around the dining table again. Brian was standing at the head holding a new bottle of wine. He was flushed, sweating slightly, his tie loosened. He looked like a man who was trying too hard to hold it together. Rachel was next to him, her hand on his arm, smiling that brittle smile. The bank director was laughing at something Brian had said. I stopped at the edge of the room. No one noticed me at first. I was a ghost at my own funeral. I watched them. I watched Brian pour the wine. I watched Rachel touch her necklace, a diamond pendant I had bought her for her 30th birthday. I watched them enjoy the fruits of my labor one last time. Then Brian saw me. He froze mid-pour. The wine spilled over the rim of the glass, staining the white tablecloth red. His eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The laughter died in his throat. Rachel followed his gaze. She turned, her smile faltering, then vanishing completely. Her face went pale, her eyes darting to the door behind me, looking for the security she thought she had. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was thin, reedy. How did you get in?" The room fell silent. The jazz music seemed suddenly loud and intrusive. 12 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. The bank director frowned, confused. "Who is this, Brian? Is this the help?" I didn't answer Rachel. I didn't answer the director. I walked forward, my boots thudding on the hardwood floor. I walked straight to the head of the table where Brian stood. He shrank back instinctively, as if he expected me to hit him. I didn't. I simply looked at him. A long, cold look that stripped him down to his component parts. Liar. Thief. Coward. "Move," I said. It was a single word spoken softly, but it carried the weight of an anvil. Brian stumbled back, nearly knocking over his chair. He looked at Rachel, panic in his eyes. Rachel stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Dad, you can't be here. You need to leave. You're making a scene." I ignored her. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table. The chair Brian had been sitting in. The chair that belonged to the master of the house. I sat down slowly, deliberately. I placed my hands on the table, my calloused fingers spreading out on the fine linen. I looked around the table at the guests. They stared back, bewildered, uncomfortable. I reached for the bottle of wine Brian had dropped. It was a 2015 Cabernet. Good year. I poured myself a glass, the red liquid swirling in the crystal. I took a sip. It was excellent. I set the glass down. I looked at the bank director. "You asked who I am," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm George Caldwell. I own this house, I own this wine, and until 5 minutes ago I owned the mortgage that kept a roof over these people's heads." The director's eyebrows shot up. "You own the house." "But Brian said—" "Brian says a lot of things," I interrupted, turning my gaze to my son-in-law. "He says he's a real estate investor. He says he built this life from scratch. He says I'm a senile old man who needs to be locked away." Rachel lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Dad, stop it. You're confused. You're having an episode. I'm calling the doctor." I shook her hand off. It wasn't a violent shake, but it was firm. "Don't touch me, Rachel. And don't bother calling the doctor. He's not coming, and neither is the van to Nevada." Rachel froze. Her face went from pale to white. She stared at me, realizing for the first time that I knew, that I had heard, that the game was up. You heard," she whispered. "I heard everything I said. I heard about Silver Creek. I heard about the power of attorney. I heard about Salvo." At the mention of Salvo, Brian made a noise like a strangled cat. He backed away until he hit the sideboard. No, George, you don't understand. It's not—" "Sit down, Brian," I ordered. My voice cracked like a whip. "Sit down and shut up." He collapsed into a chair, shaking. The guests were exchanging terrified glances. Some were reaching for their purses. This wasn't a dinner party anymore. It was a hostage situation, and I was holding the truth hostage. I looked at the bank director again. He looked familiar. I squinted. "Mr. Henderson, isn't it? From First National." The man blinked. "Yes. Do we know each other?" "We do," I said. "I banked with you for 20 years, before I sold my company. Caldwell Logistics." Henderson's eyes widened. "George Caldwell, the shipping magnate. My God. I didn't recognize you. You look different." "I look like a man who's been retired," I said dryly, "and a man who's been lied to. Tell me, Mr. Henderson, Did Brian here submit a loan application to your bank recently? Henderson looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Brian, then back at me. Well, yes. A business loan. For a substantial amount. He listed this property as collateral. And did he tell you he owned the property, I asked? He submitted a deed, Henderson said slowly, with your signature on a transfer of ownership. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the file Leonard had given me. I took out the forged document Elias had sent. I slid it across the table to Henderson. Is this the signature? I asked. Henderson picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at it, then at me. Yes. That's it. It's a forgery, I said. I never signed that. And the notary who stamped it lost his license 3 years ago. Henderson dropped the paper as if it were hot. A forgery. But that's fraud. That's bank fraud. Yes, I said. It is. And Mr. Henderson, I suggest you check your records very carefully tomorrow, because if my son-in-law has been using my name to secure loans at your bank, you might have a much bigger problem than a ruined dinner. Henderson stood up abruptly. His face was red. Brian, is this true? Did you forge this man's signature? Brian was hyperventilating. He couldn't speak. He just shook his head frantically, sweat pouring down his face. Rachel tried to intervene. Mr. Henderson, please. My father is... He's not well. He doesn't know what he's saying. That document is real. He signed it last week. He just forgot. I laughed. It was a cold, hard sound. I forgot. Rachel, I remember what I had for breakfast on Tuesday in 1985. I didn't forget signing away my house, but nice try. I turned back to the table. I wasn't done. I poured myself another sip of wine. You know, I said to the room at large, I came here tonight to give Brian a gift, a watch, a symbol of time, of hard work. But Rachel threw it in the trash. She said it was junk, just like she thinks I'm junk. I looked at Rachel. Her eyes were wide with fear. She knew I was off script. She knew I was dangerous. But one man's junk is another man's evidence, I said. I signaled to the hallway. Leonard stepped into the light. He was followed by Captain Miller and the 2 officers. The sight of uniforms in the dining room caused a collective gasp. One woman dropped her fork. It clattered loudly on the china. Mr. Ross, I said, please introduce our guests to the reality of their situation. Leonard walked to the table. He placed his briefcase on the sideboard, pushing aside a vase of flowers. He opened it with a snap. Ladies and gentlemen, Leonard announced, his voice booming. I am Leonard Ross, attorney for the Caldwell Family Trust. I am here to enforce an immediate eviction order and to serve legal notice of a criminal investigation. Eviction, Rachel shrieked. You can't evict us. We live here. Not anymore, Leonard said calmly. He handed a paper to Rachel. Notice to vacate. Effective immediately. You are trespassing on trust property. And Brian. He turned to Brian, who was now weeping silently. You are under arrest, Leonard said. For forgery, grand larceny, and fraud. Captain. Captain Miller stepped forward. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted in the chandelier light. Brian stood up, his legs shaking so bad he almost fell. He held out his hands, defeated. No! Rachel screamed. No, Brian, do something. Tell them. Tell them it's a mistake. Brian looked at her. His eyes were dead. It's not a mistake, Rachel. It's over. Miller clicked the cuffs onto Brian's wrists. You have the right to remain silent, he recited. I watched as they led my son-in-law away. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. I felt no pity, only a grim satisfaction. Rachel was left standing alone. The guests were scrambling to leave, grabbing purses and coats, murmuring apologies that no one heard. Henderson was already on his phone, barking orders to his compliance team. Rachel looked at me. Her face was a mask of hate. "You did this," she hissed. "You ruined everything." I took a sip of wine. "I didn't ruin anything, Rachel. I just turned on the lights. Now get out of my house." The silence that descended on the dining room was heavy enough to crush a man. I sat there swirling the Cabernet in the crystal glass, watching the bubbles rise and pop, while 12 wealthy strangers stared at me. My work boots were muddying the expensive Persian rug beneath the table, and my flannel shirt stood out like a beacon of poverty amidst the sea of silk and Italian wool. But I didn't care. I was comfortable. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't the guest who had to ask permission to use the bathroom. I was the landlord inspecting his property. Rachel was the first to break the paralysis. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She knew that a scene would destroy the illusion she had spent a decade crafting. Instead, she leaned in close, her face contorted into a mask of fake concern that barely hid the venom underneath. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her nails digging into my flesh through the cotton of my shirt. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "You need to get up, right now. You are having an episode. We don't want to have to call the paramedics. Just stand up and walk to the kitchen. I will give you a plate of food there. Please, do not embarrass us." I looked at her hand on my shoulder. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger. I paid for that ring. I paid for the manicure. I even paid for the hand cream she used to keep her skin soft while she plotted to throw me into a state facility. "I am not hungry, Rachel," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the ends of the room. "And I am certainly not going to the kitchen. I like this seat. It has a good view of the Liars." Brian stepped forward then. He had wiped the sweat from his forehead, but a fresh layer was already beating on his upper lip. He forced a laugh, a hollow braying sound that made everyone flinch. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry," he announced, spreading his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "This is my father-in-law, George. He has been struggling lately. Confusion. Dementia. He wanders off and forgets where he is. He thinks he still runs things. It is tragic, really." He looked at me with eyes that begged me to play along. He was banking on my shame. He was banking on the fact that I would rather be seen as senile than cause a scene that would hurt my daughter. He thought I still had that weakness. He was wrong. George, Brian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Come on, buddy. Let's go look at the garden. I bet you want to see the flowers." I didn't move. I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted like justice. "I don't want to see the flowers, Brian," I said. "I want to see the deed." The room went dead silent. Brian froze. "The deed," I repeated. "You told these fine people you bought this house with cash. You told them you are a self-made man. So show them the deed. It should be in the safe, right? Unless, of course, you don't have it." Brian turned a shade of gray I had never seen on a living human being. He stammered, looking for an exit ramp. "Dad!" "That is enough," Rachel hissed. She grabbed my arm, trying to physically pull me from the chair. "You are leaving, now." I planted my feet. I was 6'2" and built from decades of hauling crates. She couldn't move me an inch. "I am not leaving, Rachel," I said calmly. "But you might want to start packing." It was then that the man to my right cleared his throat. It was Mr. Henderson, the bank director. The VIP guest. The man Brian had been trying to impress all night with his stories of conquest and capital. Henderson had been watching me closely, his eyes narrowed behind his gold-rimmed glasses. He hadn't laughed at Brian's jokes. He hadn't joined in the pity for the senile old man. He had been studying me like a ledger that didn't quite balance. "Excuse me," Henderson said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the authority of a man who controlled half the capital in the city. Brian jumped in immediately. "Mr. Henderson, please ignore him. I will call security. We will have him removed." "Wait," Henderson said, raising a hand. He didn't look at Brian. He looked at me. He leaned forward, squinting slightly. "George," he asked, "is that you?" I turned to face him fully. I hadn't seen Jim Henderson in 15 years. The last time we met, I was signing the papers to sell my fleet. He had been a junior executive, then hungry and sharp. Now he was the man. "Hello, Jim," I said. "It has been a long time." Henderson's jaw dropped. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "My God," he breathed. "It is you." George Caldwell, the chairman. The murmur that went through the room was like a wave crashing on the shore. The guests looked at each other, confused. The chairman, the janitor, the senile old man, Brian laughed nervously. "Mr. Henderson, you must be mistaken. This is just George. He drove trucks. He used to work at the port." Henderson turned on Brian with a look of absolute incredulity. "You idiot," Henderson snapped. "He didn't just work at the port. He owned the port. This man is George Caldwell. He built Caldwell Logistics from a single barge into the largest shipping conglomerate on the eastern seaboard. He is a legend." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the buckets. Rachel looked like she had been slapped. Brian looked like he was having a stroke. He sold it," Brian squeaked. "He sold the company. He doesn't have anything." Henderson looked at Brian with pity. "Son, when George Caldwell sold his company, the market shifted. He didn't just walk away with money. He walked away with an empire's worth of capital." "I know. My bank handled the transaction." Henderson turned back to me, his demeanor completely changed. He was no longer the bored guest. He was a junior executive again, standing in front of the boss. "Mr. Caldwell, I had no idea. Brian never mentioned. He said his father-in-law was, well, he said you were a dependent. A charity case." I took another sip of wine. "Is that what he said, Jim?" I asked. "Interesting. Did he also tell you that the collateral for the loan he is asking you for this house belongs to my trust?" Henderson stiffened. He looked at Brian. Brian was shaking his head frantically, sweat flying. No, that is a lie," Brian babbled. "The house is mine. I have the papers." He is confused. "Jim, listen to me." Henderson ignored him. He looked at me. "Is that true, George? Does the trust own this property?" "It does," I said. "And I am the sole trustee. Brian and Rachel are tenants. Tenants who haven't paid rent in 3 years because I covered it. Tenants who are currently in default." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper Leonard had given me. I slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped right in front of Henderson's plate. "This is the eviction notice," I said. "And this." I pulled out the second paper, the one Elias had sent me, the copy of the forged loan document with the fake notary stamp. "This is the document Brian sent to the hard money lenders in Jersey. You might recognize the signature. It is supposed to be mine." Henderson picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the signature. Then he looked at Brian. "This is a forgery," Henderson said, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen. "A bad one. And this lien, this is illegal. You are trying to leverage an asset you don't own to secure a predatory loan." Brian was backing away, now his hands up as if to ward off a blow. "It wasn't me. It was a mistake. The paperwork got mixed up. Rachel, tell them." Rachel didn't say a word. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and realization. She wasn't looking at a senile old man anymore. She was looking at the man who used to negotiate contracts with mob bosses and win. She was seeing the father she had forgotten existed. "You lied to me," Henderson said to Brian. "You brought me here to this house, gave me this wine, and pitched me a business plan based on fraud. Do you know what the bank does with fraud?" Brian didn't answer. He couldn't. He was hyperventilating. "We prosecute," Henderson said. The guests were standing up now. The dinner was over. The illusion was shattered. The successful real estate mogul was just a grifter in a borrowed suit. The elegant hostess was a thief who stole from her own father. And the embarrassing old man in the flannel shirt was the only person in the room who actually owned anything. I stood up. I towered over the table. "You wanted me to leave Rachel," I said. "You wanted me to go so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of the important people. Well, the important people are here, and I think they are very interested in what I have to say." I looked at Brian. "You called me a janitor," I said. "You were right. I am a janitor. And tonight I am taking out the trash." I looked toward the hallway. Leonard was there. He nodded. The time for talk was over. The time for consequences had arrived. I turned back to Henderson. "Jim, I apologize for ruining your evening, but I think you should check your compliance logs tomorrow. If Brian has any other accounts with you, freeze them." "I will," George Henderson said. "Believe me, I will." Rachel grabbed my arm again. "Dad, please. Stop. We can fix this. We can talk. Don't do this." I looked at her hand. Then I looked at her face. I saw the fear. But I didn't see love. I saw a woman who was afraid of losing her car, her house, her status. I didn't see a daughter who was afraid of losing her father. "We are done talking, Rachel," I said. I signaled to Leonard. He stepped into the room. The police officers followed him. The room gasped. "This is not a dinner party anymore," I announced. "This is a crime scene." Brian let out a sob and tried to run for the back door, but he tripped over his own feet and fell crashing into the sideboard. The vase of flowers shattered, water and glass spreading across the floor. He lay there pathetic and broken in a puddle of expensive water. I looked down at him. "Happy Father's Day." "Brian," I said. "Get up, Brian," I said, my voice cutting through the whimpers coming from the floor. "You look pathetic down there. And if you are going to hear what I have to say next, I want you looking me in the eye." Brian scrambled to his feet, slipping on the wet floorboards, his expensive suit soaked with flower water. He looked like a drowned rat in a tuxedo. He backed away until he hit the wall, his chest heaving. Rachel stood frozen near the table, her hands clutching her necklace, as if it were a talisman that could ward off the truth. The guests who had paused in their flight were now watching with a morbid fascination. They were witnessing a public execution, and they couldn't look away. "Mr. Ross," I said, extending my hand without looking away from my son-in-law. "The briefcase, please." Leonard stepped forward. He placed the heavy leather case on the dining table right on top of a plate of half-eaten filet mignon. The sound of the latches snapping open was loud in the silent room. Click, click, like the loading of a double-barreled shotgun. Leonard reached inside and pulled out a stack of files thick and organized with color-coded tabs. He handed them to me. I held the stack in my hand. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. "You told these people you were a businessman, Brian," I said, tapping the top file. "You told them you were waiting on a bank loan to expand your portfolio. You told my daughter you needed $500,000 for a commercial acquisition." I opened the file and pulled out a spreadsheet printed on legal paper. It was a kaleidoscope of red ink. "This is a ledger," I announced, holding it up for the room to see. "But it is not a business ledger. It is a betting log from 3 different online casinos and 2 bookmakers in Jersey." I walked around the table, dropping the paper in front of the bank director. Henderson looked down at it, his eyes widening. Look at the dates, Jim, I said. March 3rd, $50,000 on a boxing match. Lost. April 10th, $20,000 on blackjack. Lost. May 5th, $100,000 on a horse that came in last. I turned back to Brian. You didn't need a business loan, Brian. You needed a bailout. You lost $350,000 in 6 months. You gambled away your savings. You gambled away the college fund I set up for my grandson. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to gamble away my house. Brian was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. It was an investment. I have a system. I was going to win it back. I just needed liquidity. Liquidity? I laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. You don't need liquidity, son. You need a lawyer. Because this... I pulled out the next document. A printout of a wire transfer authorization. This is wire fraud. You moved money from the joint account you share with Rachel into an offshore gaming account. That is federal, Brian. And you did it using the Wi-Fi in this house, which makes this house a crime scene. Rachel let out a strangled sob. She looked at Brian with a mixture of horror and disgust. You said it was for the business, she screamed. You told me you were buying commercial lots in heavy growth zones. You told me the money was in escrow. He lied to you, Rachel, I said calmly. Just like he lied to me. Just like he lied to Mr. Henderson. But don't get too comfortable on your high horse, because I have a file for you too. Rachel stopped screaming. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I didn't know. I am a victim here. Are you? I asked. I reached back into the stack Leonard held. I pulled out a sheaf of glossy photos and a transcript of text messages. You knew he was in trouble, I said. Maybe you didn't know the extent, but you knew the ship was sinking. And instead of grabbing a bucket, you started drilling holes in the hull to steal the copper wiring. I threw the photos onto the table. They fanned out across the white cloth. They were photos of Rachel having lunch with Weston. Long, intimate lunches. Her hand on his arm, his hand covering hers. And these I said, holding up the transcripts. These are your text messages. Would you like to read them to your guests, Rachel? Or shall I? She lunged for the papers, but I pulled them back. I think I will read them, I decided. Let's see. Here is one from last Tuesday, just after you brought me soup when I had a cold. You remember that? You were so sweet. You checked my forehead. I looked down at the paper. It says the old man is still kicking, unfortunately. But his cough sounds bad. Maybe nature will do the work for us. If not, Tuesday is the day. Once I have the power of attorney, I will dump him in the facility, and we can finally be free. Brian is a sinking stone, but the inheritance will set me up for life. Wait for me, darling. I will be a wealthy widow even if my husband is still alive. The gasp from the room was audible. The women covered their mouths. The men looked away, embarrassed by the raw, naked cruelty of it. Rachel stood there, stripped bare. Her social mask, her loving daughter act, her grieving wife routine, it was all gone. All that was left was the greed. You plotted to kill me, Rachel, I said softly. Maybe not with a gun, maybe not with poison. But you plotted to kill my life. You wanted to bury me alive in a state home so you could run off with a rival and spend my money. You looked me in the eye, kissed my cheek, and planned my erasure. Rachel was shaking. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. There was no defense. The words were there, black and white, undeniable. But here is the thing about inheritances. Rachel, I continued, my voice hardening. You have to wait for the person to die. And I am very much alive. I turned to Leonard. Show them the deed. Leonard pulled out the final document. It was an oversized paper, thick and cream-colored with a gold seal at the bottom. The original deed to the house at 24 Oak Street. This is the deed of trust, I announced. It lists the owner of this property as the George Caldwell Revocable Living Trust. It lists the trustees. There is only one name on that list. Mine. I slammed the deed down on the table. The glasses jumped. Brian and Rachel Caldwell are listed as tenants at sufferance, I said. That means you live here because I allow it. And as of tonight, I no longer allow it. But we have equity, Brian stammered, trying one last desperate angle. We put work into this house. The improvements. The pool. I paid for the pool, Brian, I snapped. I paid for the roof. I paid for the landscaping. I have the receipts. Every single one. You haven't paid a dime of principal in 5 years. You treated my bank account like a magic fountain. Well, the fountain just ran dry. I looked at Leonard. Do it. Leonard pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen 3 times. It was a signal. Execute the freeze, he said into the phone. For a second, nothing happened. The room was silent. Then a sound broke the stillness. A ping. Then another. Then a vibration. Brian's phone, which was sitting on the table next to the spilled wine, lit up. A notification banner appeared on the screen. Then another. And another. They came in rapid fire, a digital machine gun of bad news. Ping. Chase Bank alert. Your checking account ending in 4590 has been frozen due to suspicious activity. Ping. American Express transaction declined. Your Platinum card has been suspended by the primary account holder. Ping. First National Bank security alert. Access to your line of credit has been revoked. Please contact the branch immediately. Rachel's phone, clutched in her hand, started to buzz too. She looked down at it, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of catastrophe. Ping. Nordstrom payment declined. Your recurring payment could not be processed. Ping. Mercedes-Benz financial lease termination notice. Your vehicle is scheduled for repossession due to default on the corporate guarantor agreement. Ping. Venmo account suspended. The room was filled with the cacophony of their financial death. It was a symphony of notifications, each one a hammer blow to the life they had built on my back. What? What is happening? Brian screamed, grabbing his phone. Why is everything locked? Why can't I access the savings? Because they aren't your savings, Brian, I said. They were joint accounts linked to the trust for overdraft protection. You were draining the overflow. I just closed the valve. Rachel was frantically tapping on her screen. My cards, they aren't working. Even the emergency card. Dad, what did you do? That card is for emergencies. This is an emergency, Rachel, I said. You are being evicted, and you are broke. I canceled the authorized user status on every card. I froze the transfers. I revoked the trust access. You have $0. Actually, that is not true. You have -$, because I am also suing you for the return of the misappropriated funds. Brian looked at Henderson. Jim, please. You have to help me. The bank, my account's there. Henderson looked at Brian with cold eyes. He pulled out his own phone. I am texting my fraud department right now, Brian Henderson said. I am instructing them to freeze any personal assets you have with us, pending a federal investigation into the forged collateral. You won't be able to buy a pack of gum with a First National card by the time I walk out that door. Brian dropped his phone. It hit the floor with a crack. He looked at his hands. The hands that had never done a hard day's work in their life. They were shaking uncontrollably. It's gone, he whispered. It's all gone. Yes, I said. It is. The cars, the club memberships, the dinners, the trips. It is all gone. Because you didn't earn it. You stole it. And thieves don't get to keep the loot when the sheriff comes to town. I looked at Rachel. She was staring at her phone, watching the notifications pile up like snow. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but not tears of remorse, tears of loss. She was mourning her lifestyle, not her father. "How will we live?" she sobbed. "Where will we go? We don't have anywhere to go." I leaned forward, resting my weight on the table. I looked her dead in the eye. "You mentioned a state facility," I said. "In Nevada. I hear they have vacancies." Rachel flinched as if I had hit her. Or I continued, my voice softening just a fraction, but only to sharpen the edge. "You could try working. I hear Walmart is hiring. I bought a shirt there once. It's a good shirt. Maybe you can afford one if you save up." The guests were backing away toward the door now, desperate to escape the blast radius. Henderson nodded to me, a gesture of respect and apology, and briskly walked out. The others followed, leaving the four of us alone in the ruins of the dinner party. Me, Leonard, and the two people who had tried to destroy me. "You have 10 minutes, I said, checking my watch. 10 minutes to pack a bag. Just clothes. No valuables. No jewelry that I paid for. No electronics that belong to the trust. Just the clothes on your backs." "You can't be serious," Rachel wailed. "I have never been more serious in my life," I said. 10 minutes, or Captain Miller takes you out in cuffs right now. And Brian, don't bother packing. You are going to a place where they give you an orange jumpsuit." Captain Miller stepped forward, with his hand on his handcuffs. "Time's up for you, son. Let's go." Brian looked at Rachel one last time. "Help me," he pleaded. Rachel looked away. She was already typing on her phone, probably trying to text Weston, trying to find a life raft. But I knew Weston. He wouldn't answer. Not when he heard the money was gone. Miller grabbed Brian's arm and spun him around. He marched him toward the door. Brian was sobbing, a broken, hollow man. I turned to Rachel. She was alone. Truly alone. "Get out," I said. "And don't forget to take the trash out on your way. You know where the bin is. It's where you put my watch." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut should have been the end of it. It should have been the period at the end of the sentence. But Brian was not a man who knew how to accept defeat. He was a man who had lived his entire adult life on bluff and bluster, and now that his cards were on the table and he was holding nothing but jokers, his mind snapped. The reality of the prison cell, the orange jumpsuit, and the end of his country club fantasies was too much for his fragile ego to process. He let out a scream that was not human. It was the sound of a wounded animal, high and shrill. He twisted his body violently, surprising Captain Miller. For a man who had never done a day of physical labor, he found a reserve of hysterical strength. He broke Miller's grip and spun around. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and bulging. He didn't look at the door. He didn't look at his wife. He looked at me. "You did this," he shrieked, spittle flying from his mouth. "You set me up, you old bastard! You ruined my life!" He lowered his shoulder and charged. He ran across the dining room floor, slipping on the wet petals of the broken flowers, aiming straight for the chair where I sat. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to wipe the calm expression off my face. He wanted to physically destroy the man who had legally destroyed him. I didn't flinch. I didn't stand up. I didn't even put down my wineglass. I just watched him come. I knew something he didn't. I knew that Leonard never traveled alone. Before Brian could get within 3 feet of me, a shadow detached itself from the hallway wall. It was the man in the dark suit who had walked in with Leonard. I hadn't introduced him, but his name was Marcus, and he was ex-military. He moved with a speed that made Brian look like he was moving underwater. Marcus stepped into Brian's path. He didn't strike him. He didn't punch him. He simply extended an arm and used Brian's own momentum against him. He caught Brian by the shoulder, and the belt spun him around and slammed him face first onto the dining table. The impact was sickening. The table shook. The crystal glasses rattled. Brian's face was pressed into the plate of cold filet mignon. He groaned, the wind knocked out of him. Marcus held him there with one hand, his knee pressing gently but firmly into Brian's lower back. "That is enough," Marcus said calmly. I leaned forward. My face was inches from Brian's. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. "You tried to hit me, Brian," I said softly. "That is assault. Add it to the list, Captain." Captain Miller and the other officer rushed forward, grabbing Brian and hauling him off the table. His nose was bleeding, staining his white shirt. He was sobbing now, the fight completely gone, replaced by the pathetic whimpering of a bully who has finally met a bigger stick. "Get him out of here," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "He is staining the tablecloth." They dragged him toward the door. He kicked and screamed, begging Rachel to help him, begging me for mercy, begging God for a miracle. But nobody was listening. The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off his wails. The room was quiet again. Rachel was standing by the window, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She wasn't looking at the door, where her husband had just been taken away. She was looking at me. She looked terrified. I stood up. My knees popped, but I felt tall. I felt immense. I picked up the napkin from the table and wiped a speck of wine from my shirt. "There is one more thing," I said into the silence. I walked out of the dining room and into the foyer. Rachel followed me, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. Leonard followed her. I walked straight to the large decorative ceramic urn by the front door. The trash bin. I reached inside. My hand brushed against old mail, a discarded coffee cup, and the Amazon box. My fingers closed around the soft velvet of the jewelry box. I pulled it out. It was dusty, but undamaged. I walked back into the living room, holding the box up so Rachel could see it. "You threw this away," I said. "You didn't even open it. You saw the box, you saw my shirt, and you decided it was garbage. You decided it was unworthy of your brand." Rachel didn't speak. She just stared at the box. I opened the lid. The vintage Hamilton watch sat on the cushion, its gold face catching the light of the chandelier. It ticked softly, a steady, reliable heartbeat. "This isn't junk, Rachel," I said. "This watch was a gift from your mother on the day I signed the incorporation papers for Caldwell Logistics in 1982. It was on my wrist when I bought my first ship. It was on my wrist when I signed the merger deal that made us $60 million. This watch has seen more hard work, more integrity, and more success than you and your husband combined will ever know." I looked at the watch, remembering the weight of it, the history of it. "I wanted to give this to Brian," I said. "I wanted to welcome him into the legacy. I wanted him to understand that time is precious, that you build wealth by the second, by the minute, by the hour of honest labor. But you threw it in the trash." I snapped the box shut. "Because you don't value time, Rachel. You only value shortcuts, and now you have run out of both." I turned toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I raised my voice. "Leo, it is time." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door to the garage opened. Leo stepped out. He was carrying a backpack slung over one shoulder and a duffel bag in his hand. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie. He looked like he was running away from home. In a way he was. But he was running towards something better. Rachel gasped. "Leo, what are you doing? Where are you going?" Leo didn't look at her. He walked straight to me. He stood next to me, tall and lanky, trying to be brave. I put my hand on his shoulder. "He is leaving Rachel," I said. "He is coming with me." "You can't take him," she screamed, her shock turning into hysteria. "He is my son. That is kidnapping. I will call the police." "The police are already here, Rachel," I reminded her. "And they know everything. They know you stole his college fund. They know you threatened to send him to military school to silence him. They know you created an unsafe environment for a minor by inviting loan sharks into his life." I looked at Leonard. Do we have the papers? Leonard stepped forward. He pulled a document from his briefcase. Emergency temporary guardianship, Leonard said. Signed by a judge 20 minutes ago based on the evidence of criminal endangerment and financial exploitation of a minor. Mr. Caldwell has full custody pending a family court hearing. Rachel looked at the paper, then at Leo. Leo, baby, tell him. Tell him you want to stay with Mommy. We can fix this. Leo looked at his mother. His eyes were sad but dry. You sold Grandpa's records, Mom, he said. And you told me to lie. You told me to pretend he wasn't my grandfather. I don't want to lie anymore. He turned his back on her. It was a rejection more powerful than any court order. I handed the velvet box to Leo. Here, son, I said. This was meant for a man who understood the value of work. I think that man is you. Leo took the box. He opened it. He looked at the watch. It's beautiful, Grandpa. Put it on, I said. He took the watch out. It was a little big for his wrist, hanging slightly loose, but that was okay. He would grow into it. He would grow into the man it represented. I looked at Rachel. She was weeping now, slumped against the wall, defeated. This house is closed to you, Rachel, I said. You have 5 minutes to grab your things and leave. The locks will be changed within the hour. But the inheritance, she wailed. What about the trust? You can't cut me off completely. I am your daughter. I am amending the trust tonight, I announced. My voice was final. There is no more ambiguity. There are no more stipends. I pointed to Leo. This is the heir, I said. The Caldwell Family Trust now has one sole beneficiary, Leo Caldwell. The assets, the properties, the investments, they are held in his name, protected by me until he turns 25. You get nothing. Nothing, she whispered. You get the consequences of your actions, I said. And that is more than you deserve. I put my arm around Leo's shoulders. Come on, son, I said. Let's go. I know a diner that serves real food. And then we are going home. To a place where nobody asks you to lie. We walked toward the front door. We walked past Rachel, who was sliding down the wall to the floor. We walked past the spilled wine and the broken flowers. We walked out of the house of lies and into the cool night air. The police cruiser was pulling away with Brian in the back. The tow truck was backing into the driveway to hook up the Mercedes. The world was correcting itself. I helped Leo into the truck. I climbed into the driver's seat. I looked at him. He was rubbing his thumb over the gold face of the watch. Ready? I asked. He looked at me and smiled. A real smile. Ready, Grandpa. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I didn't look back at the mansion. It was just a building. My legacy was sitting in the passenger seat next to me, and we had a lot of work to do. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser bathed the living room in a chaotic strobing rhythm, cutting through the warm elegance of the chandelier. Brian was gone, his screams fading into the night as Captain Miller shoved him into the back of the squad car. The sound of the door slamming shut was final, a heavy metal thud that vibrated in the floorboards. Inside the house, the silence that followed was suffocating. It was just me, Leonard, the remaining officers, and Rachel. My daughter stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of her vanity. The spilled wine looked like blood on the white carpet. The shattered vase was a jagged testament to the violence that had just occurred. She looked at the empty doorway, where her husband had just been dragged out. Then she turned her eyes to me. Her face was a ruin of mascara and terror. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking at me with contempt or boredom. She was looking at me as the only lifeline she had left in a sea that was rapidly swallowing her whole. Dad, she whimpered, her voice cracking. They took him. They actually took him. You have to stop them. You can't let them take the father of your grandson. I looked at her, feeling a strange hollowness in my chest. There was no anger left, just a deep, icy fatigue. "He isn't a father, Rachel," I said, my voice flat. "He is a thief who stole from his own child. And you helped him." Rachel took a step toward me, her hands reaching out, trembling. "I didn't know, Dad. I swear. I didn't know he was forging signatures. I didn't know about the loan sharks. I was a victim too. He lied to me. He manipulated me." I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Stop," I said. "Just stop. I have the transcripts, Rachel. I have the messages you sent to Weston. I know you were planning to put me in a state facility. I know you were counting the days until I died. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you were an innocent bystander. You were the architect. Brian was just the hammer." Rachel's face crumbled. She fell to her knees, not gracefully, but heavily, collapsing under the weight of her own deceit. She crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my jeans. It was a pathetic sight, the woman who had mocked my clothes now clinging to them for salvation. "Please, Dad," she sobbed, the tears carving tracks through her makeup. "I'm sorry. I was scared. We were drowning in debt. I just wanted to save us. I am your daughter, your little girl. You can't do this to me. You can't throw me out on the street." I have nowhere to go, I looked down at her. I tried to find the little girl I had carried on my shoulders, the one who used to wait for me at the door when I came home from the docks. But she wasn't there. This woman was a stranger who had sold my vinyl records for $50, a stranger who had taught my grandson to be ashamed of his name. "You have plenty of places to go, Rachel," I said, pulling my leg away from her grasp. "You have friends, don't you? The ones you were trying to impress tonight. Call them. See if they have a guest room for a woman with no money and a criminal investigation hanging over her head." "They won't help me," she wailed. "They only liked me because of the house, because of the money." "Exactly," I said. "They liked the show, and the show is over." I looked at Leonard. He was standing by the door, his face impassive, checking his watch. It was time. "Get her out," I said. Rachel's head snapped up. "What? No. You gave me 10 minutes. You said I could pack a bag." "I did," I replied. "But that was before Brian tried to assault me. That was before you tried to lie to my face one last time. The offer is rescinded. You leave now." "But my clothes," she screamed, scrambling to her feet. "My jewelry, my laptop. I need my things." "Those aren't your things," I said, my voice rising, filling the room with the authority of the chairman. "The jewelry bought with money stolen from my accounts. The laptop purchased with the credit card you opened in my name. The clothes paid for by the mortgage payments you skipped. None of it is yours. You have been living a stolen life, Rachel. And tonight, the repo man is here." I signaled to the private security officers Leonard had brought along. They stepped forward, large, silent men in dark suits. They weren't rough, but they were efficient. One of them took Rachel by the arm. "Ma'am, it is time to leave," the officer said. "No!" Rachel shrieked, trying to pull away. She lunged for the sideboard, grabbing her purse. "My phone. At least let me take my phone." The officer gently but firmly removed the purse from her hand. He placed it back on the table. "Leave it," I ordered. "The phone plan is in the company name. The device was expensed to the trust. It stays." Rachel looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The mask was gone completely now. There was no more begging. Only the rage of a narcissist denied her supply. "I hate you," she hissed, her voice venomous. "I hate you. You are a cruel, bitter old man. I hope you die alone." I looked her in the eye, unflinching. "I won't be alone, Rachel," I said, calm as the grave. "I have Leo, and I have my dignity. You are the one leaving this house with nothing but the dress on your back and the hate in your heart." I nodded to the officers. "Take her." They marched her to the door. She kicked and screamed, cursing me, cursing Brian, cursing the world. But they didn't stop. They dragged her through the foyer past the mirror, where she had admired herself so many times, and out into the cool night air. I followed them to the threshold. I watched as they escorted her down the driveway, past my rusted Ford truck, past the manicured lawn she loved more than her father. They led her to the edge of the property line and released her. She stood there on the sidewalk, shivering in her silk dress. The streetlights illuminated her in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The neighbors were watching from their windows, the curtains twitching. She was exposed. She was destitute. She was exactly where she deserved to be. She looked back at the house one last time. She looked at me, standing in the doorway, the master of the domain she had tried to steal. "Don't come back, Rachel," I called out to her. "If you step foot on this property again, you will be arrested for trespassing." She turned and ran. She ran down the street, her heels clicking on the pavement, disappearing into the darkness of the neighborhood she could no longer afford. I watched her go until she was just a shadow. Then I stepped back inside. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. The sound was the most satisfying thing I had heard in years. The house was quiet. The jazz music had stopped. The air smelled of expensive perfume and stale wine. It was a beautiful house, but it needed a deep cleaning. I walked back into the living room. Leonard was packing his briefcase. "It is done, George," he said. "The locks will be changed within the hour. The accounts are secure." "Thank you, Leonard," I said. I sat down heavily in the chair at the head of the table. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, but it was a good exhaustion. The kind you feel after a long day of honest work. I looked at the empty room. I had lost a daughter tonight, but I had saved a grandson, and I had reclaimed my life. It was a fair trade. The sun that hit the kitchen island the next morning wasn't the same sun that had set on the disaster of the night before. It felt cleaner, sharper. It cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like a spotlight on a blank stage. The silence in the house was absolute. No jazz music, no clinking glasses, no whispered conspiracies, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sizzle of bacon in the pan. I stood at the stove flipping eggs. I hadn't cooked in this kitchen in 5 years. Rachel didn't like the smell of frying grease. She said it lingered in the curtains. Today I let the grease pop and spit. I wanted the house to smell like real life. I wanted it to smell like breakfast, not a catered deception. Leo sat at the marble counter on one of the high stools. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, his backpack resting by his feet. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, the kind that come from growing up 10 years in a single night. But he wasn't hunching anymore. He sat straight. On his left wrist, the gold face of the Hamilton watch caught the morning light. It was loose, sliding down his forearm, but he didn't take it off. He kept touching it, grounding himself. "Eat," I said, sliding a plate in front of him. "Eggs, bacon, toast. Real food. Not avocado foam or whatever they served yesterday." Leo picked up his fork. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and swallowed. "Thanks, Grandpa." I poured 2 mugs of black coffee. I slid one to him. He looked at it, surprised. "You are almost a man, Leo," I said. "You have seen things most men don't see until they are 40. You can drink coffee." He took a sip, grimacing slightly at the bitterness, but he kept drinking. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," I said, leaning against the counter. "We finish what we started. The locks were changed at midnight. The security team is outside patrolling the perimeter. Your parents, they are in the system now. Leo looked down at his plate. Are you going to help them? With Bale, I looked at my grandson. I loved him enough to tell him the truth even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. No, I said firmly. I am not. Leo didn't flinch. He just nodded. I spent 45 years cleaning up messes, Leo. I continued. I cleaned up supply chain disasters. I cleaned up labor strikes. And for the last 10 years, I tried to clean up your mother's life. I paid her bills. I covered her mistakes. I thought I was helping. But I wasn't. I was crippling her. I was teaching her that consequences were for other people. I took a drink of my coffee. It was hot and strong. If I bail them out, I said, I am robbing them of the only lesson that might actually save their souls. They need to sit in that cell. They need to wear those clothes. They need to eat that food. They need to realize that the name Caldwell doesn't mean you get a free pass. It means you have a higher standard to live up to. And they failed that standard. Leo looked at the watch again. He rubbed his thumb over the crystal. Am I going to turn out like them? He whispered. It was the question that had been haunting him. I reached across the counter and put my hand over his. No, I said, because you know the value of this watch. They only saw the gold. You see the time. You see the work. That is the difference. You have a conscience, Leo. You saved my records. You tried to warn me. That is character. And character is the only currency that matters. Money, Sonny, is just gas in the tank. It gets you where you are going, but it doesn't tell you which way to steer. You have a good compass. Just then my phone buzzed on the countertop. It vibrated aggressively against the marble. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, but the caller ID location said County Detention Center. It was Rachel. She was using her one phone call. She was calling the man she had tried to erase. She was calling the father she had thrown out like trash. She was calling the bank she thought would never close. Leo looked at the phone. Then he looked at me. Are you going to answer it? He asked. I looked at the buzzing phone. I thought about the text messages to Weston. I thought about the facility in Nevada. I thought about the way she looked at me when she dropped my gift in the urn. No, I said. I reached out and pressed the red button. Decline. Then I tapped the screen 2 more times. Block caller. The buzzing stopped. The kitchen was quiet again. That part of my life is over, I said. I am not looking back, and neither are you. I picked up our plates and put them in the sink. I didn't wash them. I didn't care. This wasn't my house anymore. It was just an asset to be liquidated. Leonard would handle the sale. He would handle the cleaning. He would handle the memories. Grab your bag, son, I said. You're going to be late for school. Leo grabbed his backpack and hopped off the stool. We walked out of the kitchen through the foyer and out the front door. I didn't lock it. The security guard was standing at the end of the driveway. He nodded to me. I nodded back. My Ford F-150 was parked right where I left it. It looked out of place next to the manicured hedges and the stone facade of the mansion. It looked rough. It looked tough. It looked real. I opened the passenger door for Leo. He climbed in, tossing his bag onto the floorboard. I walked around and got into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life with a familiar throaty growl. It was the sound of freedom. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb. I drove down Oak Street past the silent houses of the neighbors who judged by appearances. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look at the house that Greed built. I looked at the road ahead. I looked at my grandson sitting next to me, checking the time on his grandfather's watch. We turned onto the main road, the morning sun hitting the windshield. Where are we going after school? Grandpa Leo asked. Home, I said. To my apartment. It's small. The faucet leaks a little, but the rent is paid, and the records are there. Tonight we are going to listen to Coltrane. Sounds perfect, Leo said. And it was. It was absolutely perfect. This story reminds us that true power is often silent and real wealth isn't found in flashy cars or mansions, but in integrity and hard work. Rachel and Brian made the fatal mistake of judging a book by its cover, assuming that a flannel shirt meant a lack of value. They let greed poison their hearts, forgetting that the hand that provides can just as easily take away. In the end, we learn that family isn't determined by bloodline, but by loyalty. Respect is the only currency that truly matters, and unlike money, it cannot be borrowed or stolen. It must be earned. If you were George, would you have given Rachel one last chance, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.